Have you ever completely lost control over something so small that just an hour later you couldn't even recognize the version of yourself that reacted that way? Like dropping your keys, getting a slightly passive-aggressive text, or dealing with slow internet. And in that moment, it feels like the world is collapsing, but later you sit there wondering, what was that? If that's ever happened to you, you're not alone. And more importantly, you're not crazy, because what you're experiencing is not about the situation itself. It's about what's happening beneath the surface, inside your mind and nervous system. And once you understand this, everything about your reactions starts to make sense. Because the truth is, your brain has a hidden threshold, an invisible limit for stress. And once that threshold is crossed, your ability to think logically doesn't just weaken, it shuts down completely. And that's when you say things you don't mean, damage relationships, and feel like you're being controlled by something you can't even see. And the first reason this happens is something psychologists describe as a sudden emotional takeover, where your brain's alarm system kicks in before your rational thinking even gets a chance to respond. Imagine your mind like a secure building where your logical thinking is the calm guard at the front desk, checking facts, staying composed, making balanced decisions, while deep inside there's an alarm system that's designed to protect you from danger. But here's the problem. That alarm system doesn't care whether the threat is real or not. It reacts instantly. And when you're already carrying stress from your day, your week, or even your past, something tiny can trigger that alarm, and suddenly your body is flooded with stress hormones. Your heart rate increases, your muscles tighten, and your mind switches into survival mode. And in that moment, you're not reacting to what just happened. You're reacting to everything that has been building up inside you, all at once. And this leads directly to the second reason, which is something most people don't want to admit: emotional buildup. Because every time you hold back what you really feel, every time you say it's fine when it's not, every time you avoid conflict just to keep the peace, you're not actually letting things go. You're storing them, quietly, layer by layer. And it feels like you're being mature, like you're in control, but in reality, you're creating pressure. And that pressure doesn't disappear. It waits. And then one day it finds an excuse to explode, often over something completely unrelated, like someone chewing too loudly or leaving a dish in the sink. And suddenly you're reacting with an intensity that doesn't match the situation, because it's not about that moment. It's about everything you never allowed yourself to process. And if you're honest with yourself, think about the last time something bothered you, but you chose silence instead of speaking up. Did it really go away, or did it stay somewhere in the background, waiting? And this is where things go even deeper, because the way you react today is often shaped by experiences you had years ago, especially during your childhood, when your brain was still learning how to interpret the world. Because if you grew up in an environment where things felt unpredictable, where emotions were intense, where you had to constantly be aware of other people's moods, your brain adapted by becoming highly alert, constantly scanning for potential problems. And that adaptation may have helped you survive back then, but now it means your system is more sensitive than it needs to be. So even small things can feel overwhelming because your brain is trying to protect you from danger that no longer exists. It's reacting based on patterns, not reality. And that's why a delayed message, a slight tone change, or a small inconvenience can feel like something much bigger, because your system doesn't fully distinguish between past pain and present situations. And on top of all this, there's another factor that most people completely overlook, and that is mental exhaustion.
because your ability to stay calm, to think clearly, to regulate your emotions is not unlimited. It's a resource, and just like your phone battery, it drains throughout the day. Every decision you make, every frustration you deal with, every time you hold back a reaction, it uses up that energy. So by the time you reach the end of the day, after dealing with stress, responsibilities, and constant stimulation, your capacity to stay composed is already low. And then one small thing happens, and it pushes you over the edge, not because it's significant, but because you have nothing left to manage it. And this is why people often react the strongest at home, with the people they care about the most, because that's where they finally drop the effort of holding everything in. And while all of this explains why it happens, there's one more layer that keeps this cycle repeating, and it's something that's uncomfortable to acknowledge, but important to understand. And that is the fact that these emotional outbursts can become reinforcing, because when you suppress your emotions for too long and then finally release them, there's a moment of relief, a sense of release, like pressure being lifted, and your brain notices that. It associates the explosion with relief, and over time, this creates a pattern where suppression builds tension and the outburst releases it. And even though it leads to guilt, regret, and damaged relationships afterwards, in the moment it feels like the only way to get that relief. And so the cycle continues: suppression, buildup, explosion, regret, repeat. And breaking this cycle doesn't start with controlling your reactions in the moment, because by the time you've reached that point, your system has already taken over. It starts earlier, by becoming aware of your limits, by recognizing when stress is building before it reaches that breaking point, by allowing yourself to express small frustrations before they turn into overwhelming reactions, by setting boundaries instead of silently enduring everything, and by understanding that your reactions are not random. They are signals, indicators that something inside you needs attention, needs rest, needs acknowledgement. Because when you stop judging yourself for reacting and start understanding why it's happening, you gain control in a completely different way, not by forcing yourself to stay calm, but by creating conditions where calm becomes natural, where your system isn't constantly overloaded, and where small things remain small instead of becoming the final trigger for something much bigger. And once you reach that point, you don't just react differently, you experience life differently, with more clarity, more stability, and far less chaos inside your own mind.